The Fred Wolf cartoon's version of April O'Neil, with her yellow jumpsuit and fearless attitude, proved so popular that it became one of the most iconic adaptations of the character. In 2002, Lloyd Goldfine and 4Kids decided to make a loyal adaptation of the TMNT comics. This meant ignoring some of the most iconic artistic choices of the Fred Wolf cartoon, and April was one of those icons. Join me today as I explore the 4Kids version of April O'Neil, her legacy, her character arc, and her place in the Turtleverse. This 23-year-old version of April was a college graduate with a science degree who worked as a lab assistant for Dr. Baxter Stockman and Stocktronics Incorporated. It's unclear what happened to her parents, but according to the marketing material, she was living in a building that she inherited from her father. An antique shop named Second Time Around was located on the ground floor, and April was in charge of it as well. Apart from her parents, April had an older sister named Robin, who moved out to the West Coast. From a very young age, April had many career options, but it was the influence of her uncle, Augie, that led her down a path in science. Uncle August taught her how to love math and science, and this is why she ended up with a degree in math. Unfortunately, her Uncle Augie wasn't always around. He would often disappear for months at a time, traveling the world, only to return later with trinkets and tales from his adventures. This was a predictable pattern until he disappeared to never return again. Back at Stocktronics, April was an assistant on a critical project that could mitigate the rat problem in New York, the Mousers. But one day, April realized that half of the Mousers were off the grid. She warned Baxter, but after seeing him dismiss her concerns, she began to wonder if there was something he wasn't telling her. After a brief investigation, April discovered a secret entrance to an underground factory. There, she realized that Baxter was mass-producing the Mousers for an unknown sponsor. That benefactor was the Foot Clan, and Baxter was using the Mousers to rob banks for them. Baxter caught April spying on him, and to eliminate her threat, he sent the Mousers after her. April escaped into the sewer tunnels, where she was saved from the robotic creatures by the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They took her to their home, where she and Splinter exchanged stories and deduced Baxter's hidden intentions from the Mousers. They went back to the lab to shut down the operation. Still, Baxter managed to escape before the Stocktronics building was completely destroyed, and with it, April's lab assistant job. However, April's loss gave her something she was missing: a family. Taking some time off to process what she had just gone through, April reopened the Second Time Around shop and asked the Turtles to help reorganize the store. It was on this occasion that she met Casey Jones. She immediately felt attracted to him. However, Casey's personality and clumsiness were enough for the two to start a love-hate relationship. It's not hard to imagine, given that Casey was also very brave and protective of others. The store didn't last long. The Foot Clan tracked Leo back to April's place and cornered them inside a walk-in pantry. Realizing they were trapped in there, the Shredder broke a natural gas pipe and set the building on fire. April remembered that they had covered a hole in the wall where a refrigeration unit used to be, so they reopened it and escaped the building just in time before the explosion. Knowing they had no safe place to hide, they went to a new place, Casey's family farmhouse in Northampton. The explosion was enough for the Foot Clan to suspect that the Turtles were finally dead. This gave the Turtles an advantage to return to the city and plan their ambush at the Foot headquarters to put an end to the Shredder. Knowing that their security system was designed by Baxter, April offered to help to hack into the system, allowing the Turtles to anticipate all the threats and make their way to the Shredder, whom they finally defeated, at least for a while. When the Turtles were investigating the disappearance of their master, they realized they needed to get inside the mysterious TCRI building. But they couldn't simply go inside, so they asked Casey and April for help. Casey would create a distraction, and April would try to help them get inside the building. It didn't take long for things to get out of control. April and Casey ended up waiting outside the building, which they now knew belonged to an alien race known as the Utrons. The suspicious activity was enough to call the attention of the National Guard, who were trying to make their way into the building. Trying to find out what was going on inside, April disguised herself as a Channel 6 reporter. This proved to be fruitless. However, the turtles were back from space and contacted April to warn everyone outside about the impending implosion of the building. She helped scare the National Guard away, saving many lives when the building was reduced to nothing. Jobless and without a place to live, April moved in with the turtles for a while. This situation proved to be very stressful for all parties involved. So stressful that spending time with Casey felt refreshing to her. However, this temporary arrangement came to an end after the turtles and April recovered some stolen jewels. After exchanging them for reward money, April was able to rebuild her building. For the reopening of the shop, the turtles helped April move things around. Among the things that survived the fire was a mysterious puzzle cube that belonged to her uncle Augie. This artifact turned out to be a dimensional gateway that transported April and the turtles to a world inhabited by giant wasps in another dimension. To the turtles' surprise, April adapted pretty quickly to their new environment. Between her past experience with high school gymnastics and a sense of adventure that she clearly inherited from her uncle, April gained the nickname Jungle Girl. After finding a man-made structure, they went there to investigate and discovered that Augie was there and had found a way to return home by using a giant puzzle cube at a wasp-infested temple. When the turtles and April arrived, they realized that Augie had never completed the sequence. This meant that either someone interrupted him or he went somewhere else. They finished the sequence and returned home, but April promised she would find her uncle again. Perhaps inspired by that experience in another dimension or the frequency of high-stakes adventures with the turtles, April started training in ninjutsu under the guidance of Master Splinter. Being able to defend herself gave April the necessary confidence to be part of the action more often. This included saving people during the Triceraton invasion, rescuing the turtles from the hands of Agent Bishop, and engaging in hand-to-hand combat against Federation soldiers. Being the only humans in the team strengthened the bonds between April and Casey, and the two started dating. Knowing that his mom never approved of any of his girlfriends, Casey told her that April was his fiancée. This lie would soon be put to the test, with Casey's mom's surprise visit to the farmhouse. Casey's mom realized pretty fast that it was all a lie. However, since April passed all her tests, she approved of their relationship. April and Casey casually dated for a while. But after the defeat of the Shredder, Casey decided to make their relationship official. One day, Uncle Augie sent an encrypted message to April's computer through the dimensional artifact. Donatello recognized the symbols from the time he scanned Augie's journal in that other dimension. They used his coordinates to follow what they thought was a distress signal. But when they arrived in that world, they discovered that it was just a test from Augie, who wanted to repair this world's puzzle cube to transport them to Earth, in the hopes of bringing peace and prosperity. This was a dream come true for April. She started helping her uncle repair the machine so they could go back home. Donnie left them alone to reconnect as he explored this highly advanced civilization. It didn't take him long to discover that these lizard beings were actually invaders who ate the entire population of this planet. Having run out of food, they were counting on Augie to find a way to Earth, where they planned to eat everybody. Unfortunately, April and Augie had already fixed the artifact, and the lizards knew their cover was blown. April quickly made a plan to travel to the only other coordinates they knew, the giant wasp's world. Once there, she set up a time bomb to destroy the puzzle cube. They left for Earth, trapping the lizards who followed them to that planet, and who would, undoubtedly, end up getting eaten by the giant wasps. Upon their return, Uncle Augie reunited with Robin, April's older sister, as well. April and Casey were in a relationship for over a year until Casey felt it was time to ask the big question. With Raph's help, they went to Chinatown to find an engagement ring for April. They ended up at a shop where its owner, Mr. Sun, gave them a ring for free. He didn't tell them why, but he did this because he knew the purple dragons were after it. This was also known as the Ring of Yin, as in yin and yang. Hun had heard rumors that the Shredder was coming back, so he wanted to get his hands on that ring to become stronger. The ring allowed its wearer to upset their inner balance of yin and yang, tapping into the dark and harnessing it for evil power. It granted flight, speed, and the means to create terrible monsters. Unaware of any of this, Casey proposed to April, and after saying yes, he put the ring on her finger. While it was a nice moment, April felt something was off right away, and within a few hours, she started experiencing strange mood swings. It didn't take long for Raph and Casey to realize it was the ring that was turning April into a demon. However, the transformation wasn't yet complete, and in a moment of clarity, April tried to remove the ring from her finger, but with no success. To complicate things even further, the Purple Dragons came into the scene. They kidnapped her with the intention of getting the ring off of her finger, even if they needed to remove the whole finger to achieve that. Mr. Sun tracked Casey down to warn him that only Casey would be able to remove the ring from her finger, because he was the one who put it there. And they didn't have much time to lose, because the more April wielded it, the more it would corrupt her. She would no longer create monsters, she would become one. Back at the Purple Dragon's headquarters, April turned into a giant flying demon and managed to escape from Hun. Assuming it wasn't too late, and putting his life at risk for her, Casey removed the ring from her finger, returning her to normal. By the end of this adventure, Mr. Sun had gifted the couple a new ring to replace the old one. Still, one could say that Casey's heroic acts were undoubtedly more powerful than a mere ring. After defeating the Cyber Shredder, the happy couple got married in Northampton, with Professor Honeycutt officiating the ceremony. The relationship between April and Casey was a series-long plot, so it was fitting to make their wedding the final episode. However, this wouldn't be the end of their story. They would end up founding O'Neill Tech, a company that would revolutionize the world. It would be their great-grandson, Cody Jones, who would accidentally transport the Turtles and Splinter to the year 2105 for a year. That was the story of the Four Kids April, a character initially created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird in 1984 and adapted for this show by Marty Eisenberg and the Four Kids creative team. She was voiced by Veronica Taylor, who you may know from her English dubbing of Ash Ketchum for the Pokemon series. It's worth mentioning that the Four Kids cartoon influenced the way the Turtles were adapted after it ended. Tom Waltz, one of the main writers in the IDW comics, was heavily inspired by the show. He was also one of the writers of The Last Ronin, a story set in a dystopian future where April became the leader of a rebellion, a plot that, interestingly enough, was also present in the Four Kids episode known as Same as It Never Was. But going back to the question I asked at the beginning of this video, how could Four Kids create a new version of April that could shine on its own? Well, it was thanks to Lloyd Goldfine that April ended up being a more loyal adaptation of the comic. Before the show was picked up, Mirage was receiving very different pitches, one of which involved April and Casey as high schoolers. At the time, that didn't sound like the Turtles to them, so Lloyd's idea of adapting the comics became the winning pitch. And if you think about it, it was a clever idea to differentiate the character as much as possible from the Fred Wolf version, because the two would inevitably be compared. Unfortunately, adapting the original version of the character came with its legacy problems. More specifically, the Mirage writers often didn't know what to do with the character. The Four Kids team of writers had to find a purpose for the character in the Turtles world, initially serving as their passport to the surface world, and later joining them in their adventures, helping them on the field or remotely. The two things they needed to avoid were to make her a reporter or a damsel in distress. April ended up wearing yellow, especially in the last season, as the character was heavily redesigned to align more with the CGI movie. But for most of the series, she wore different colors. According to director Chuck Patton, making a loyal adaptation of the comic was exciting because it allowed them to make Baxter Stockman black again. However, because of the influence of the movies and the Fred Wolf cartoon, they ended up making April a redhead instead of dark-haired like in the comics. The show also had a short-lived comic book that loosely adapted the first few episodes before going into new, original stories. In one of these chapters, it was explained that April wanted to be a reporter as a kid, but was pushed into studying science by her father. It was due to her journalistic curiosity that she ultimately discovered the truth about Baxter. While this could work as canon, it was very early in the life of the show, and Uncle Augie hadn't been introduced yet. In fact, Uncle Augie was probably a late addition, as it was actually April's father who was missing in an early draft of April's artifact. Peter Laird felt like April's father's disappearance was coming out of nowhere, and suggested creating a new relative instead, and that is how Uncle Augie came to be. In conclusion, was this version of April a worthy successor to the Fred Wolf one? I think it was a great adaptation of the Mirage April. In fact, given how consistent her character was in the show, you could make the case that this was the better version of the original April. She's not as iconic as the Fred Wolf April, but given how long this show was on the air, to many, this is the April O'Neil. Is that the case for you? Do you love both versions? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.